Hello everyone, I'm your host Amelia Atkins and you're watching Generation Gap. Today's topic of discussion will be the strike here at IUP, and we'll be right back to talk about it right after these messages. Hello everyone, I'm your host Amelia Atkins and we're back here at Generation Gap. Like I said, the topic of discussion will be the IUP strike, and I'm going to have my panel introduce themselves. From my left, we'll start with you.
Hi, so my name is Brandon Reger. I'm the Secretary for the Student Government Association here at IUP.
I'm David Loomis. I'm a journalism professor at IUP, and I'm also the Public Relations Chair of the Faculty Union APSCUF.
Hi, my name is Brian Swatt. I'm the Student Government Representative here at IUP.
Okay, well let's just hop right on into this. This is such an important topic that we have going on right now. So the strike. It seemed to have been like a rumor when we first got up here in the first week. It's like, oh, there's going to be a strike, but maybe there won't be a strike. But now it's here. It's October 5th. Strike's supposed to happen October 19th. Are you guys surprised? Did you think it would really happen? We'll start with you.
So, do I think it was going to happen? I think that's kind of a strange question. Do I think it will happen? That's a different question in itself. The process that leads up to a strike is very, it's challenging. There's a lot of different components that lead into it. And so that's why, am I surprised? No, because this collective bargaining is very challenging within itself. So I think the state system and APSCUF together have a very, very challenging process they're going through. And I think it's just something that, it's interesting to see go along, but it's something hopefully that will be resolved soon.
How about you, Dr. Loomis?
Surprised? No, not in light of recent developments, but unnecessary, certainly. It's been 450 days during which this negotiation period has gone on. The strike is not a certainty, and it's not guaranteed. It really depends on the chancellor of the state system of higher education and his willingness to negotiate in good faith to produce a contract that will pay teachers and professors and coaches a decent wage, that will not slash the income of adjunct teachers, that will not undermine the quality of the education that we're accustomed to delivering. And all of those issues involving our compensation are minor compared to the primary issue of the quality of education that we're really worried most about. So one of the contributors to this situation is the budgeting for higher education in Pennsylvania. And if you look at the budgeting for higher education in Pennsylvania, you'll see that it has been slashed. And consequently, if anyone's going to fight back, it's going to have to be us. So we hope that we do not have to strike. We're meeting tomorrow in Harrisburg to rally against the continued cuts in spending for higher education, as well as a demand that they sit down and negotiate with faculty members and coaches in good faith. To date, we haven't had that.
I have to say surprised, no. So many days without a contract, and so many negotiation meetings that have just gone by without an agreement or a settlement reached. I can see the frustration and the aggravation among APSCUF, as well as just across the entire state system. Really, this is a pressing issue that will directly affect the state system, APSCUF, union employees, as well as, most importantly, the students. So surprise, no, I can understand the frustration. However, I do think it's important that we do stay at the negotiation tables, that we completely leave the students out of the process, and we'll talk more about this later. But I will be surprised if it does happen to actually conclude to a strike. If they're at the negotiation table throughout the last end of the days here, and it reaches the 19th, and APSCUF does happen to strike, that's a huge, thing for the students to face. It could be detrimental to the state system. It could be very jeopardizing. So it's important to keep that in mind. And if that does happen, I will be very surprised that both APSCUF and the state system failed to reach an agreement, and that it did have to lead towards a very drastic thing like a strike. So.
Right. Okay. So, Dr. Loomis, you were beginning to talk about exactly almost a cause you were about to go into, exactly the cause of the strike. So that's what I really want to focus on here. What exactly, who or what is the main cause of the strike? I don't know if you want to start that off with that question.
Well, from my perspective, and again, I'm a member of the faculty union. I've taught here for 14 years. I've been a member of the union for all 14 of those years. And the cause of the strike from the perspective of this union member is the Chancellor of the Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education, Frank Brogan. Frank Brogan is a man who's the highest paid public official in the state of Pennsylvania. He is not a guy who has any higher education other than a master's degree, yet he's dictating to PhDs the quality of the education that we are administering to our students. Now, I agree that the students are the most important element in this whole negotiation, and the students are who we like to think we're fighting for, because no one else is. So the underfunding of higher education in Pennsylvania, we now rank 47th or 48th in the nation when it comes to per capita expenditure per student in higher education in Pennsylvania. That didn't happen because of teachers' salaries. Almost all of that is a result of underfunding from higher education. So if the legislators in the General Assembly in Harrisburg decide to address higher education as a cost, as an expense, then they'll cut it just like they will any other expense that they think will balance a budget. Right. But in our view, higher education is not a cost. It is not an expense. It is an investment. And if you buy a house to cost it out, you're not going to want to live there for long. So we think that if you're going to invest in the students and the future of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, you ought to pay for it. Instead, what the Chancellor and his predecessors have done is and the former governor has whacked the budget for higher education in Pennsylvania, some of the steepest cuts across the country. So we in the union don't see anybody else standing up for the quality education that we deliver to students. We don't see the legislators standing up. We don't see Frank Brogan standing up. He won't even sit down at the bargaining table and seriously negotiate contract terms for our compensation. But it's really the quality of higher education that I think lays at the doorstep of the Chancellor, and the Chancellor has not done his job.
Either one of you.
So I really do have to echo the sentiments of Dr. Loomis, really going again with the underfunding of education in Pennsylvania as a whole. Really the state legislature along with the past governor really have cut the funding and appropriations to education in the state system substantially. And it's been very negatively impacting the state system and those constituents inside of it. What I do think is important to recognize and understand for everyone that is following the faculty negotiations is that the Board of Governors receives an appropriation directly from the state legislature. So they have their allocation of funding that they receive, and then they have to then allocate that throughout their budget to determine costs, to determine services, and the quality education that Dr. Loomis was referencing to before, and that goes with APSCUF faculty member salaries. What's important to recognize is that the Board of Governors in the state system is trying to work with what they have. They can only do so much with the funding that they do have. And I think the state system has actually moved towards progress within the faculty negotiations, mainly with the past thing that has happened with a $159 million commitment to APSCUF in wage increases. That is a 12% wage increase across the board for APSCUF employees and faculty members. And it's important to realize that the state system and the Board of Governors do not actually have that money. They're going to have to create flexibility within institutions' budgets. They have to request for more funding throughout the state legislature just to make that possible, to meet that commitment and obligation. So they are moving towards progress, but they are working with what they have.
Wow. Okay, so that was a great start to this discussion. We've just begun to dip our toes in, and we're going to get right on going and continue, but right after this quick commercial break, guys. We'll be right back.
3, 2, 1, action. Oh gosh.
everyone. I'm your host, Amelia Atkins, and welcome back to Generation Gap, where we're discussing the strike here at IUP. We're just going to hop right back into this discussion because it's great. We're on fire here. So, first question I have, we'll start with you. So, something important that we always talk about on the show is the stigma that IUP has. We already know IUP may have this party school stigma. Well, what do you think that this strike is going to do for the stigma of IUP?
So I think it's a great question, and it's a broader question. So I think it can almost broaden to what can it do for all state system schools, because we are 14 schools essentially in one. And what the question, what stigma? I feel my fear is that students will have unnecessary backlash against faculty or the administration unnecessarily, because it's not necessarily it's not there. There are certain reasons why the strike will happen if it does end up happening, and I would hate to see students be uninformed on the issue and make those decisions. So as a student government association, we work with a lot with advocacy, and we want to put as much outreach to students and say, be informed. Look at the PASSHE state system. Look at APSCUF and see what each are saying. Both are asked the same questions, and both will give different answers. So that's when we urge students to make their own decisions, and so that there aren't stigmas that are untrue. I think that's really important for students to be well informed and to take that next step. A lot of times people think that faculty need to get out there and do this, or the presidents or the administration need to get out there and take care of this. Well, a lot of it, students aren't. They can play a huge role in this as well, and I think it's important for students to realize that.
How about you, Dr. Loomis?
The stigma. As far as I can tell, IUP and all 13 other state system of higher education campuses don't necessarily suffer from a stigma because of this strike issue. Again, the strike is, and we hope doesn't happen, but if it were to happen, it wouldn't be necessarily because of Indiana University or Kutztown or Clarion or any other campus in the system. It would again rest in our judgment with the state system of higher education and the legislature. So here's an example of how this casts a stigma at the state system of higher education, not at the campuses. Last March, the state legislature was conducting appropriations committee hearings. Those are the committee hearings that decide who gets how much money in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, including the publicly funded universities like IUP. Now, generally speaking, when you go before the appropriations committee, you want money. You don't go before the appropriations committee to tell them, we don't want any more money. You want money. And you want it because inflation, you want it because obligations are greater than they were last year, you have more programs that you need to adhere to, whatever the case may be. But in the case of the legislative hearing in March at the legislature, the state system of higher education's representatives were not asking for money. That is their job. Their job is to ask for more money for students to be educated as well as we can possibly afford. And we're not asking for huge amounts, we're just asking to bring us off of the cellar. The cellar, 47th or 48th in per capita spending, is just not acceptable for a state of this size. And so you would expect that the guy who's in charge of higher education would ask for a little more dough. And instead, he said no. And in fact, he laid the blame on faculty members. And that is not where the blame resides. The blame resides in the legislature where he was testifying. Those people have underfunded higher education. So the stigma does not fall on IUP so much. So far as I can tell, I've never heard a discouraging word out of President Michael Driscoll. If anything, he's kept his head down, hasn't said anything negative about us, and speaks well of funding for higher education. So I don't see how any stigma should be cast on either our campus or any of the other 13 campuses in the system based on this issue over funding and strike.
How about you, Brian?
I don't necessarily think a stigma will be created. I'm thinking more of the effect on the state system as a whole. What's important to understand is that the state system has never had a strike within the entirety of the state system's history. The only other strike that we can possibly look at for future, for reference, is the precedence that Temple's strike set back in the 1980s. And what happened in that case was their faculty actually decided to go on strike because they did not reach a collective bargaining agreement at the time. They went on strike for 20 days, and Temple actually had to shut down their school. They actually had to shut down their school and send students home. And the result out of that was students did not return, and even you saw a decrease in application rates in the next year to the school. So you saw the jeopardizing effects on Temple just in a 20-day long strike on that school alone. You're talking about a statewide strike.
Right.
That is a broad impact. That could be a very negative impact in our state system. So I'm thinking more of the effect than the stigma. One stigma that I do want to dispel is that the state system and the Board of Governors do not care about higher education. They would not be in the positions that they are if they did not care about higher education. And I think one thing that they're very good on is their devotion to keeping the students involved throughout the entirety of the process and advocating efforts to the state legislature. That's why we have advocacy days within the spring. And that's a very imperative job that Brandon and I have as student government leaders to advocate on behalf of the student body. And that's also a very imperative job that the state system has to advocate to the state legislature. And they do care about us, and they do keep the students in mind throughout the entirety of their discussions and throughout the entirety of their advocacy efforts. So that's one stigma that I just want to dispel at this time. But yeah, I'm thinking more of effect.
Okay, cool. And you brought up how there hasn't been a strike since 1980, which is important. I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to touch on it. We haven't had this strike in so long, and now it seems out of nowhere they're ready to let us go on strike. They're not thinking about what's going to happen negatively for the students or for the parents or anyone. They're just letting it happen. What do you think it is about now versus back then in 1980 when they were like, okay, we're not going to do these strikes, or past years?
So if I can, APSCUF deals directly with the state system. Temple's a state-affiliated school. It's not a part of the state system. So it was a completely separate situation and scenario. That's just the only strike in the history of kind of the state system, because it's a state-affiliated school that sets precedents for what could happen. I don't think they're ready just to, and I think Dr. Loomis could speak to, I don't think they're ready just to go on strike and just throw it all away. You know, they're meeting in negotiation meetings come October 14th, 15th, and 16th, and out of that, they're hoping for good faith collective bargaining and really, really hoping and faithfully reach a settlement out of that. So I think everyone's committed to going to the negotiation table. It's about making progress out of those negotiation meetings. That's the most important key.
Okay. If you want to quickly touch on what you believe the difference between then and now, why are they allowing us to go through with it now?
Well, I think Brian's distinction between Temple, a state-affiliated, and IUP and the rest of the state-funded schools is important to note. But I do think that the underlying issues are probably similar. It's true that most workers want more compensation. They want better health benefits. In the case of our negotiations with the state system of higher education, in our judgment, they are not judging negotiating in good faith with us. That's why we have filed a labor complaint against their methods of negotiation. I should also address one of the remarks that came up in an earlier conversation about $159 million in wage increases. That's half the story. It's true they offered $159 million in wage increases, but they clawed it back on everything else. So if you want to, suppose you're looking for a good grade in a class that you're taking, and the professor offers you bonus points on it, but at the same time, he's withdrawing your grade on other possible assignments. That's the equivalent of what we're talking about here. They dangled $159 million, but didn't mention that they're clawing back more than half of that in other methods that they're suggesting. So you can read the headline that says $159 million, and it makes the union look bad, but you got to look deeper than that, because the Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education is not telling the whole story. The whole story is that they're clawing it back. By the way, it's true that the professors who are tenured people are pretty well compensated. I'm not complaining about my salary. That's why I'm more concerned about the quality of education of students than I am about my salary. But I do think when I'm not getting a raise at all, then I think you have stuck your finger in the eye of the other party, and that's, in our case, us.
Right.
So I think if there's a problem with the negotiations, it certainly lies with the administrative arm, not with us.
Okay. Okay, well, that was a great discussion that we're having here, but unfortunately, we're out of time in this segment. So if you guys just stay tuned for 1 second, we'll be right back to continue our discussion.
Today we have a bit of a different episode for you guys.
I can promise you, you won't want to touch that remote.
Don't do it, Rockers. Don't do it!
Max, you don't even belong on set yet.
La, la.
Get out of here.
Sorry,
I got a little
been
ahead of
singing
myself.
every day, la la la.
Jake, not you two.
Best show ever.
Be quiet over there.
Guys, get it together. Anyway, Rockers, just keep watching.
Oh, hey, Devontae. Been working on something, man. I want you to check it out.
Keep working on that.
Okay.
Hello, everyone, and we're back onto Generation Gap. I'm your host, Amelia Atkins, and we're going to go into our last segment here with our discussion on the IUP strike. So, guys, I'm not going to ask you anything. I'm going to sit back and relax, and I'm going to let you guys just go at it. Talk about anything you want to about the strike. We can start with you, Brandon.
So I guess for me, my message I would like to get out is it's to students. I want students to know that it is your responsibility to be informed. You know, I've had a lot of students come up to me that know that I work within student government, and they'll say, "What's going on?" You know, and I can, I'm one voice. I can only explain so much, and I think it's really important for students to use, APSCUF's, their information page, PASSHE's information page. They both have information pages for students. They can see press releases, different things like that. I think it's really important that students be aware and they make their own decision. I did speak about this a little bit earlier, but students play a vital role in getting these negotiations solved. Students can contact legislatures, students can contact Dr. Mash, APSCUF president, students can contact Chancellor Brogan, and they can, voice their opinions. And I think that's really vital in this process and getting this, this whole issue resolved before the 19th.
Right.
I agree. Brandon is exactly right. If there's any stakeholder in this process that can put an end to this, it is students. Students have way more power than they may realize. Tomorrow, on Thursday, October the 6th, the State State System of Higher Education's Board of Governors is meeting in Harrisburg, and faculty members will go there and they will rally and protest and raise a little heck. But if students show up, then they will not be able to ignore students. And we're not saying that students should buy into our argument. We're not saying students should buy into their argument. But students are the primary stakeholder in this whole negotiation. If students were to show up, there would be no strike. I am confident that the Board of Governors would heed the voices of thousands of students across the state system. By the way, judging from the Chancellor's Facebook Live webcast, I think it was Tuesday.
Which can all be viewed, that can be viewed as well.
Yeah, it's still viewable. There were some comments, and here are some of the comments as reported by the Pittsburgh Tribune Review in Tuesday's edition. It says that more than 650 online questions and comments, students said they were frustrated with the lack of specifics about issues such as tuition refunds, replacement faculty, financial aid, and the semester calendar in the event of a strike. So what that tends to suggest to me is that, first of all, interest is high, and second of all, students are as equally frustrated with faculty as they are with administrators, and rightly so. But if students only work to inform themselves, then they're missing the most important part. One of the most important things that students can learn in a higher education environment such as this is how to engage civically. This is their opportunity right now. If they want to end this strike, just send a note or a postcard or an email to Frank Brogan, and the Board of Governors and tell them what you think, or ask them what you want to know. But just the volume of voices will change the equation substantially, and I'm sure we would probably avoid the strike altogether.
So this is a difficult job for us as student government leaders. We as the Student Government Association are the primary advocacy piece for students on campus. We are the direct line of communication that can communicate these issues to the administration and faculty members on campus. And it's important for students to know that. What's difficult for us is our primary job throughout the entirety of the negotiations is to keep the student body informed. And how do we do that? But provide them with non-biased, neutral, factual information. And between the two entities that are at stake here, that are in the negotiations, it's very difficult often to dissect the rhetoric out of each side's press releases and provide the students with that factual, unbiased, and neutral information. There's some rhetoric that's been passed around here, some different terms that kind of elevate the argument, underline some issues, or emphasize it in a way that makes it, from APSCUF's side, seem reasonable, or from the state system side seem reasonable. What's important, I think that's the biggest thing to understand here, this is largely an issue between the state system and APSCUF. That students should not be directly involved with these negotiations, that these bodies are there to negotiate for that reason. However, it's great to understand that students can be directly impacted by whatever decision that is made. Mm-hmm. So APSCUF should not use the students to leverage its position within the negotiations, and the state system should not do that as well. The students should be vocal, and we encourage that, but they should be receiving unbiased information to inform themselves to be vocal. And it's important to advocate those things to us, that way we can advocate them on further to the direct connections that we have in order to do so. So it's important that the students are involved, considering that they are the stakeholders here, and that they are the direct constituents that are going to be receiving this quality education that keeps getting referred to here. But it's important to understand that we shouldn't get directly involved, that we shouldn't get in between APSCUF and the state system, that it's an issue between them, and that we should not be used as a leverage or bargaining chips to further its position within the negotiations.
So with all due respect, I would disagree with my friend Brian. I was a college kid back in the 1960s, and the big issue back then was the war in Vietnam. Now, it was often said that we should just leave it to the generals to fight the war in Vietnam. Since it was me who was going to get drafted to go to war in Vietnam, I sort of sensed that if anybody was going to change the equation, it was going to have to be me. Millions of people my age actually got out in the street and said, we don't want to go to war, and we think that the draft is an unfortunate and illegal exercise. We ended the draft, and that was the end of it. I urge students to view this issue in the same way that we viewed the war in Vietnam.
Wow, that was a great discussion we just had. I would like to take the time to thank my wonderful panel, Brandon, Dr. Loomis, Brian. Thank you so much for being with us tonight, guys. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this episode, but make sure you're with us next week, and make sure you follow us on our social media pages, Twitter, Snapchat, Facebook, YouTube, and whatever else you may have that we probably have to follow us on. Thanks, guys. Have a good night.